The grand ballroom of the luxurious Carlton Hotel shimmered under the glow of golden chandeliers. It was one of those evenings where the rich and powerful gathered, their laughter mingling with the clinking of fine crystal glasses. Among them was Alexander Carter, one of the wealthiest men in the country, tall, composed, and always exuding an air of authority. He was a man everyone respected, admired, or feared. With a single nod, he could close billion-dollar deals. With a single word, he could change lives. But tonight, something unexpected was about to happen. In the farthest corner of the room, a young black girl stood quietly, watching the crowd. She didn't belong there, not in the way the others did. Her dress, though elegant, wasn't designer. Her posture, though graceful, lacked the practiced ease of the elite. But there was something about her, something that made her presence undeniable. She wasn't there to blend in. She was there for a reason. Alexander barely noticed her at first. Why would he? She was just another guest, another face in a sea of privilege. But then, as he casually glanced her way, his eyes caught something small, yet incredibly familiar. A ring. The girl was nervously twisting it around her finger. A simple gesture. But the sight of that ring made Alexander freeze. For a man like him, surprises were rare. He was used to controlling every situation, knowing every detail before it even unfolded. But this was impossible. That ring, the intricate gold band, the tiny sapphire embedded at its center, was one he had seen before, one he had held in his hands, one that should not exist in duplicate. Alexander took a step closer, his heart pounding in a way it hadn't in years. "Where did you get that ring?" His voice, though calm, carried an urgency the girl couldn't ignore. She hesitated, looking up at him with wide, determined eyes. Then, with a small but firm voice, she said the words that would shake him to his core. "My mother's ring is just like yours." For the first time in a very long time, Alexander Carter, the man who had everything, who knew everything, was speechless. The room around him blurred. The chatter, the music, the laughter, all of it faded into the background. It wasn't possible, and yet the proof was right in front of him. Who was this girl? How did she have that ring? And what did it mean? As questions swirled through his mind, he knew one thing for certain. His life was about to change forever. Alexander Carter's breath caught in his throat. The words echoed in his mind. "My mother's ring is just like yours." It didn't make sense, couldn't make sense, and yet there it was. An exact replica of the ring he had worn for years. A ring that had belonged to the most important woman in his life, his mother. He had never seen another like it. The design was unique, custom-made decades ago by a jeweler who no longer existed. It was impossible for another one to exist, yet here it was, resting on the finger of a girl who stood before him, unwavering. His eyes searched her face, looking for an explanation. She was young, maybe 19 or 20, her dark brown skin glowing under the chandelier light. Her curls framed her face, and her expression was a mix of nerves and quiet strength. "What did you say?" His voice was lower now, almost cautious. She swallowed, but her gaze didn't waver. "My mother had this ring for as long as I can. Remember, she said it was special, but she never told me where it came from." A sharp chill ran down Alexander's spine. "Where is she?" He took a step closer, ignoring the curious glances from the surrounding guests. This wasn't just some coincidence. This was something deeper. The girl hesitated, her fingers tightening around the ring. Then, with a quiet breath, she said, "She passed away last year." Something in Alexander shifted. The room felt suddenly smaller, the weight of the moment pressing against him. He knew grief well. It had been a shadow following him for years. But this was different. It wasn't just the loss of a stranger's mother. It was something more. The girl looked away for the first time, as if bracing herself. Before she died, she told me to find you. Alexander felt his heart stop. The words hit like a shockwave. He stared at her, unable to process what she had just said. To find him. How? Why? His mind raced with questions, but none of them had answers. Who was your mother? His voice was barely above a whisper now. She looked back at him, her eyes filled with something heavy. Hope, fear, desperation. Her name was Evelyn. The name nearly knocked the breath from his lungs. Evelyn. It wasn't possible. He hadn't heard that name in over 20 years, but he had never forgotten it. A name tied to memories, buried deep, to a past he had convinced himself no longer existed. His hands clenched at his sides, as images of a younger version of himself flooded back. Back when life was different, when money and power hadn't yet shaped him into the man he was today. Evelyn. She had been his first love. The kind of love that didn't fade, even when life forced them apart. He had loved her in a way that had scared him, and when fate had taken him down a different path, he had left that love behind. Or so he had thought. His voice was rough when he finally spoke. Your mother was Evelyn? The girl nodded, and just like that, the world shifted beneath his feet. For years, he had told himself that part of his life was over. He had moved on, built an empire, become untouchable, but now, standing before him was proof that the past had never truly left him, that it had followed him, waiting for the right moment to return. His gaze dropped back to the ring on her finger. If Evelyn had the same ring, then his breath hitched. There was only one possibility. His eyes met hers again, searching for something, anything, that would make this moment make sense. Why did she tell you to find me? The girl hesitated, then took a slow, shaky breath. Because, she said, voice barely above a whisper. You're my father. The words hit him like a blow. The noise of the ballroom disappeared entirely, drowned out by the deafening silence in his mind. His vision blurred at the edges, his heartbeat pounding like a drum against his ribs. No, that can't be right. But as he looked at her again, really looked, he saw it. The resemblance he had missed before. The shape of her eyes, the curve of her jaw. The same stubborn expression he had seen in the mirror for years. A rush of emotions crashed over him. Disbelief, regret, shock, something deeper that he wasn't ready to name. He had spent his whole life chasing success, building walls around himself so high that nothing from his past could touch him. And yet, here she was, his past, standing right in front of him. Flesh and blood, his daughter, a daughter he never knew existed. His throat tightened, and for the first time in years, he felt truly powerless. He had spent his whole life believing he had control over everything. But this was something he had never prepared for. His daughter had found him, and nothing would ever be the same again. Alexander Carter felt the world shift around him. His daughter. The words echoed in his mind, growing louder, drowning out everything else. He had spent his life believing he was in control of his destiny, that his past was locked away behind the walls of his success. But now, standing in front of him, was undeniable proof that fate had other plans. The girl, his daughter, stood still, waiting, her fingers twisting the ring around her hand. He could see it now. The resemblance that had been hidden in plain sight, her jawline, the sharp determination in her eyes. It was him, but there was something else too. A softness, a quiet strength that reminded him of Evelyn. His voice came out hoarse, barely audible. Why didn't she tell me? The girl hesitated. She wanted to, she admitted. But she was scared. She thought you had moved on, that you wouldn't want us in your life. She looked down, swallowing hard. And when she got sick, it was too late. A sharp pain twisted in Alexander's chest. Regret. A feeling he wasn't used to, but one that now consumed him completely. Evelyn had been everything to him once, and he had let her go. But he never imagined, never dreamed, that she had been carrying his child, that he had missed 2 decades of his own daughter's life. His hands curled into fists. I would have been there, he said, his voice rough with emotion. If I had known. She nodded, her expression unreadable. I know, she whispered. She believed that too. That's why, before she passed, she made me promise to find you. Alexander exhaled, the weight of everything pressing down on him. He had spent years chasing power, thinking money and influence were the only things that mattered. But in this moment, none of it meant anything. This, she, was what mattered. Silence stretched between them. He could feel the stares from the other guests, the curiosity, the whispers. But for once, Alexander Carter didn't care about the world watching. Finally he spoke. What's your name? A small, almost hesitant smile touched her lips. Maya. Maya. He let the name settle in his mind, feeling the way it fit. His daughter. His daughter. The thought still felt unreal, but at the same time, it was the most real thing he had ever known. He took a deep breath. Maya. I don't know how to make up for lost time. He admitted, I don't even know where to start. Her expression softened. You just did, she said quietly. Something in his chest loosened. For the first time in years, Alexander Carter, the billionaire, the man who had everything, realized what he had been missing all along. It wasn't power, it wasn't money, it was family. And as he looked at Maya, he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't going to let her go. Not again. A new chapter was beginning, and this time he was ready.